It's time for Prove All Things, a Bible discussion program on the Word of God. A panel of preachers will deal with your questions and comments. Prove all things, hold fast that which is good, abstain from all appearance of evil, and the very God of peace sanctify you wholly. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to be able to be back with you. This would be, if we weren't on tonight, this would have been the fourth week we weren't on. Instead, we only spent 3 weeks off. Some of that was illness, some of it was worthlessness on the part of Brother McKee back here, who who decided to take a vacation in the middle of a pandemic. But anyway, we've forgiven him and are welcoming him back. Over here on my right tonight, Bob Hines from down in lovely downtown Crawfordsville, Indiana. How are you,
Hey,
sir?
John. Fine, John. I'm glad to see you. Glad you're back on the air.
I am too. I was sick some, but I'm better. Been better for a while now. And so forth. You know, there have been one or two other trials I'll mention in a minute. But how's things going out there?
Doing fine. Actually, this past Sunday, for the first time in several months, the congregation actually met in the building again.
Okay.
So we're still distancing it, masking, and
I understand.
kids and such as that. But the brethren are having to deal with not being able to turn the volume down on me now. Uh, Now that I'm off the radio and back in the building.
Because you're not on their radio. Okay. Did you adjust back to preaching to an audience instead of automobiles?
Of course, I enjoyed it a great deal, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, instead of people across the distance at a parking lot.
Yeah. Seeing
Nice to. It was easier and more joyful to hear. Well, just to be closer, to see smiles, have comments in Bible class, and actually sing to each other, or close to each other, I should say. So it was a most enjoyable time.
I know. I can imagine. The high school road church, in fact, Brother McKee back here is arguing with me right now. There's another elder in the church who'll have to get involved.
Mm-hmm.
We're scheduled to be in the parking lot on
The 12th.
Sunday and back in our building on the 19th, but we'll see about that. We'll have to discuss. And have we got Brother McKee on camera yet? Now we do. There he is. How are you, sir?
I'm well, John. How are you today?
How was the vacay?
It was very good. I am sorry to hear about your mother. That was very sad.
Oh, thank you.
And
You've come back full of shrimp.
very full of shrimp, shrimp and scallops, and sun on my face, and a great irritation with those that want to wear masks all the time.
Yes, I know.
There are plenty of mask Nazis down in Florida, just in case you're curious.
Alan mentioned my mother. My mother, most of you know. My mother died last Friday, and she was 98. And I might mention, for the benefit of the folks here or whoever, that the funeral for my mother will be at 10 o'clock on Thursday at Crown Hill Cemetery. And we're going to have this in a graveside situation, so we're not as limited by who can attend. I do suggest to you that if you're going to come, you might bring your own chair. First of all, your chair would be more comfortable than anything else we might find, and we're going to do it in the morning because it won't be blazing hot in the morning, but it will be a hot day, and hopefully the rain will hold off till the afternoon. But we will be there at Crown Hill Cemetery, and if you'll email me if you really want to come, but don't know, of course, where the gravesite is. I think we're going to try to come up with a map so we can Crown Hill, and so that you can go there. But it's been 3 weeks of sickness and difficulty and frustration, as many of you felt as your loved ones are in the hospital and you can't get to them. But hopefully we're going to come out of that and move on to broad and sunny uplands. All right, this is Prove All Things, in case you hadn't figured that out yet. And we are a Bible discussion program. And so if you have a Bible question or comment, we welcome it. You don't have to agree with us. You can feel free to disagree. We're on 2 platforms, right, Engineer Dave?
Yes, we are.
We're on YouTube, and if you look around on your page on YouTube, you'll see a chat possibility there, or comment possibility. And whatever you write, these gentlemen here will tell me about it, and we'll try to respond from the scriptures. We're also on Facebook. Everybody knows how to comment on Facebook. If you would, like us and maybe share us with some of your friends. Program's brought to you by the High School Road Church of Christ, 3103 North High School Road here in Indianapolis, Indiana. And it has been a trying period, I know, for all of us, and still is. We have a question that was written in today. This is a long, involved question. This person wrote a book. But anyway, we'll try to deal with as much of it as we can. The questioner says, I would like to hear a discussion about the current events in our country. Okay. It's not exactly, but she does specify. This is not a question of good versus bad law enforcement officers. For the sake of this discussion, I'm assuming all policemen, law enforcement officers are good and not corrupt. I think that's a fair assumption. This is also not a discussion about respecting policemen or the military, etc. Those individuals are here to protect us and deserve the utmost respect. Cities have been experiencing unrest, riots, destruction, etc. In some places, police officers have been instructed to stand down. In other cases, no specific order has been given, but police officers have chosen not to engage. My question, we finally got to the question, how does a Christian who is a law enforcement officer deal with this? Can a Christian in good conscience just stand there and watch people be hurt and injured? Can a Christian in good conscience just stand there and watch stealing and looting take place? Can a Christian in good conscience just stand there and watch destruction, fires, etc. going on? Is it possible today for a Christian to even be in law enforcement? My wife and I did, I can't remember the day, one day last week, decided to drive downtown. Indianapolis has had several riots. I don't know anything else to call it but a riot, where it started out probably as a protest and wound up being a riot. A large section of downtown was vandalized, windows broken, stealing out of those places. And anyway, as we drove downtown, it was sort of amazing to us to see how much of the central section of the city was actually boarded up. Now they're trying to make it look as good as they can by drawing pictures on the boards and putting a menu on the boards, but it was obvious there was tremendous destruction throughout our city, and of course we've all seen it in other cities. So anyway, having prefaced all this, here's a question. If you're a policeman, how do you deal with this? If you're instructed by your superiors to stand and watch while people steal and loot and riot, can a Christian do that in good conscience? Bob?
Well, I would suggest that, let's see, first of all, I guess it depends on how basic we need to be. I suppose that we need to start from a scriptural basis. We might have to touch on Romans 13 to make sure that we understand the responsibility of every Christian to deal with the government in respect and to make a distinction. Is that too basic or backing up too far?
Basic is great. Go right ahead.
It needs to be understood that it was not easy. It was not easy at all to be a Christian in the time of the Roman Empire. And when Paul talks about the government and the Christians' response and responsibility to the government in Romans 13, he's talking to Christians who, is it an overstatement to say that Rome was at the heart of the Roman Empire?
Yes.
That were having to deal with that which was government in their face, and yet Paul would say, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, here's the application, therefore whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. So if the question is whether or not we need to be obedient to the law and respectful to the government, this surely is the case from the basic passage in Romans 13. And I could actually read more of the chapter, but perhaps that's enough to make this thing. Now I understand the Lord made a distinction in the account of render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. There is a distinction made, but that too has to be in harmony with this passage in Romans chapter 13. So at its basis, we have to decide, will we honor the government? Will we honor the ruler? And I personally, I suspect you would agree, John, when Paul wrote Romans 13, this was not in the time when there was the most favorable of emperors ruling over the Roman Empire. This is not to say that the ruler was doing everything that was right, yet there was still to be this question of honor and respect and living as best we could. Now, I'm not trying to skirt away from the question, but that seems like that might be a basic part for a start.
I think so. That's pretty good. Alan, what about it? What about a policeman?
Well, as I read the question further down in the text that was given to us, the question is it possible for a Christian to just stand there and watch riots and illegal behavior? Can a Christian law enforcement person who is being paid to protect the city and the people just stand and watch innocent people be injured, stolen from, property destroyed, all of which are lawless behaviors, etc., and then they attend worship service on Sunday and sing, "Oh, how I love Jesus"? It really focuses on the question of the person who's in the law enforcement role, as I understand it. And for that person, going back to Bob's scripture that he noted there in Romans 13, here is the purpose of government, as Paul explains it in verse 4. He is a minister of God for you for good, but if you do that which is evil, be afraid, for he bears not the sword in vain. And that idea of bearing the sword is an application of force, even potentially deadly force, in the maintaining of law and order. I was also thinking about James, the 4th chapter, and verse, I think it's verse 17. If I can go over there, which says, Therefore, to him that knows to do good and does it not, to him it is a sin. So if I'm a police officer and if I've taken an oath that I'm going to uphold the laws of the city of Indianapolis and the state of Indiana, and I am just standing and watching people who are looting and burning. I mean, where's the line? You know, we might legitimately ask ourselves, where's the line? Is it okay to break a window? You know, if one of these guys breaks a window, is that, you know, do I step in then? If one of the guys throws a firebomb through the window, now do I step in? If one of the guys takes the owner out and begins beating him in the street with a violent assault, now can I take action? What if the guy's got a gun and is shooting people on the street? Now do I take action? I mean, where's the line? You know, we're hearing stories. We're hearing, rumor, perhaps might be an idea, might be a rumor. We're hearing, but we are hearing some accusations against the government of the city that they ordered the police to stand down, to, in other words, not do anything. And if that's the case, then all I can say is shame on the government, shame on the mayor. No, we have these men and women in the law enforcement for this purpose, to maintain law and order and to punish evildoers. And if they are, because it's politically uncomfortable to do that, again, shame on the mayor, shame on it's the deputy mayor, whoever it may be, shame on them if they gave such an order. And no, if I was a law enforcement officer, I would feel obliged to step in and take action and stop the lawbreaker.
Okay. May I suggest that sometimes it's not quite as simple as that? When you have a situation where the police fundamentally are badly outnumbered and crimes, I can see where the police commanders or the mayor or others, where to stop this would involve a great deal of brutal repression in order to stop it. And perhaps that repression would bring on more outrage to the point that the police are outnumbered and so forth. So I can see the police making, or the authorities making, strategic decisions that we're going to protect this element, we're going to try to do what we can, but we may have to withdraw and let that building burn. And maybe we can come back at some time and do more. Which I have been in a riot or two in my life, and believe me, you have people that are acting and behaving like animals, and this is not the time to sit around and reason with them. If you don't have enough people with you, you're not going to buffalo them with some force, and so perhaps the best idea is to try some strategic way to calm the situation down. So I wasn't in the situation. I'm very disappointed about it, but I can understand where sometimes these were hard decisions to make. I don't understand some of the decisions that were made, but that's not the scriptural position you're asking. Here I am, a policeman, and I'm commanded by my command authority that I should hold my position instead of launching out in the middle of 50 or 100 or 200 rioters, people who essentially have lost their minds. And I can see that a Christian would obey that rule. It's a situation like that. Just as I might not run in a burning building because it's too dangerous. Or I might not, I know there's a man in there with a gun and he's about to shoot a captive, he's got a gun. My running in may make the situation worse, and so my command authority says, we're going to handle this another way. We're going to try to negotiate with him or whatever. And I can see where a Christian deals with that. It's frustrating, but there's a lot about being a policeman, I'm sure, that's frustrating. The whole idea of, we did arrest a few rioters here and there, and to see them run back out on the street because the courts let them back out a day later is also a frustration. So there's a lot frustrating about it, but the police are not a goon squad. They can't just act on their own. They act on the basis of command authority in the enforcement of the laws. I've sometimes wondered why are you out here picking up speeders on this road when there's criminals about? And that's not my decision either. And a Christian, if the boss, the sergeant or commander has said, you go pick up speeders out on Route 4, okay, that's what I'm going to do. Yes, I think Mike could be more useful in some other capacity, but I'm going to do what my command authority says. Otherwise, you don't have a police department. You just got a bunch of goons running around doing what they please and enforcing the laws they please. Don't like it, didn't like it, not sure of the wisdom of most of the decisions, but then I wasn't in the spot. Go ahead, Engineer Dave.
Brian asks us, he sort of says the same thing you're saying. He says a police officer is subject to his command system. Should the officer disobey his commander? Just asking for a wider thought. Also, we've gotten a few comments saying that they're having an interruption of connection or maybe some listening problems. Just in the background, you might have heard me, but I was listening to the program on my phone, and it was coming through fine for me. So I can't tell you what kind of connection problems you are having miles away.
Well, I will say this in our defense: there have been 2 or 3 major automobile accidents in this neighborhood this afternoon, and we might be having a thunderstorm coming over us. So some of that might be contributing.
Gerald just commented. He says it's the protesters interrupting the broadcast.
There you go. You know, Bob, your daughter, I understand, works with the police department. Can you shed any light on this?
Well, I think it's basically the principles that you have been discussing. That is that it is a question of command. There might be things that we do not always understand, but they do seem to understand. First of all, there is such a thing as a strategic withdrawal. There is also a decision, however subjective, a decision that is sometimes made not to make a situation worse.
Mm-hmm.
And so to either stand where you are or even to back away a bit because it could make the situation worse. It's somewhat like the situation where state troopers call off a car chase of pursuit, figuring that they'll see if they can find that fellow later because the car chase is becoming more dangerous to way too many people in certain areas. I think I understand that sort of logic, that sort of understanding. They'd like for the situation to come into control, but sometimes they want to make sure they're not adding to the difficulty. And so I think our fallback position is to preach Romans 13 and proceed from that point. And I suppose the other thing that we can do on a regular basis is to pray for those who are in authority.
Yeah.
That they might make good and dare we say even better decisions.
But some of the questions of this question are about somebody's being beaten up or assaulted, and do I go to help them or not? And you're going to have to balance the thing. And which one of the in the parable of the Good Samaritan, which one are you going to be? Could you safely pass by on the other side? Could you safely avoid him, or are you under obligation to do your best for your neighbor? Who is my neighbor? And it's as Bob said at the beginning, there's some basic points here that you can't exactly get away from. I know in some of these situations, I, as an individual, I would feel obliged to help if I could. I'd be out there throwing water on the fire or trying as best I could to protect the people who are being attacked. But sometimes that's just not possible. It's just not possible. And shame on, as Alan was saying, shame on the authorities, but shame on the people who are so undisciplined and so ungodly that they would behave in that fashion. What do you got over there, Engineer Dave? Have we talked this one to death?
Gerald just commented again. He said maybe we should call our law enforcement agents to check it out.
There you go. But
I think he's referring to the transmission problem that we were having. I think he's talking about that. I think he's being a little facetious.
He's being a little facetious. Alrighty, let's go ahead. I was hoping we'd have more comments. Have we got listeners tonight after our 3-week hiatus?
We have listeners.
Well, good. I'm glad. I appreciate y'all's joining us tonight. Let's go. Let me make sure I got all the buttons pushed and so forth. Hold on. I'll do this number. Maybe that'll help. Here we go. Let's see if we can hear a pre-recorded question.
You don't need to go to church to study the Word. You got to put your faith in what you believe.
Okay, you don't need to go to church to study the Word. You got to put your faith in what you believe. I don't know exactly that first statement, of course, is true. Don't know exactly the relationship of that second statement. Bob, can you enlighten us?
I'm not quite sure I understand all I do about that comment, but I almost got the idea that this was someone who was trying to explain away the need for going to church and just stay home and read his Bible.
I got that impression. What about that? Do you need to go to church? Can you just study at home and let that be it?
Well, first of all, you can study at home. We are commanded to study at home, to make that an individual part of our lives. Is it the Bereans about halfway through Acts were studying their Bibles and the Scripture daily to see if these things were so. Mm-hmm. That's the case. But the person who studies their Bible well will come very quickly to the conclusion that the church is a part of God's plan. And that being the case, then let me take a passage out of context here. What God has joined together, let not man put asunder. In this case, if you read in Matthew chapter 16, where Jesus talked about the kingdom, talked about the church. I will build my church, the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. You can tell that one of the reasons that Jesus came and lived and died and rose again was his part in the church. The church, his church which he was going to build. When the gospel is first preached in Acts chapter 2, those who obey the gospel were added to his church. Acts 2 says in verse 47. And as we study through Ephesians over and over, it talks about the church being part of God's manifest plan for our salvation. Ephesians 4 says, just as there is one God and Father, one Lord and one faith, there is also one body and one Spirit. This body was his church. So the fellow who says, I want to study the Bible, but I don't need the church, is divorcing something that God wants kept together. One should, I think, can I say this? One should lead to the other, if you will. Our appreciation for the Scripture should lead to a love for the Lord's church, his people who have obeyed his gospel.
Absolutely. You know, one of the big trials, Alan, of this whole pandemic, whatever this thing is, virus threat that we're going through, has been, in my mind, I have felt compelled to keep the church together. It's so easy to just say, let's all shelter in our house. We'll take the Lord's Supper at home. We don't really need the church. We don't need to assemble. And I've tried, as far I know, they did out of Crawfordsville, and we're trying to do it at High School Road. We've tried, I would say, the absolute limit of trying to keep the church doing what the Bible says and together so that we can be together. A lot of telephoning going on, and a lot of nice things happening. What about, is it important that the church meet? You know, we've been told by any number of governors throughout the country that they can just do the virtual church thing, just meet on the internet, and that church really doesn't matter. It's not essential. What do you think about that?
I think they're mistaken in that attitude. I think that they are ignoring a number of scriptures that probably they're ignorant. They're entirely ignorant of them. You know, we are commanded as a group, as a church, as a congregation, to meet with one another, to gather together on the first day of the week. We're to sing songs of encouragement to one another. We are to pray for one another. Well, of course, we could pray without being in the building altogether, but it's obviously more easy to see who isn't there if you're all gathered together. And of course, we are to gather together, you know, not necessarily especially, but one of the purposes of gathering together is to take the Lord's Supper, to remember the Lord's death until he comes. And to suggest that this could all be done virtually is, in my mind, ludicrous. It just doesn't work.
It just tears the heart, to me, out of the church completely.
I think it does. I agree with that. I think it makes a mockery of the church, and it is showing, to my mind, a certain lack of faith. You know, yes, we have a disease. Yes, it's a bad disease. Yes, we ought to probably take care of folks or be cognizant of folks who are at great risk. But not everybody's like that. Not everybody's at risk. Not everybody's going to die if they get COVID. You know, no, you know, it's not 100% fatal. It's not even. You know, best I know, it's not even 1% fatal. It's a much lower fatality rate than that. And we're doing more, as this country is doing more and more testing, for example, they're finding more and more folks who had the virus who didn't even know they had the virus. Mm-hmm. You know, well, how are we showing faith in God by refusing to meet because, you know, shall we not drive to church because somebody could get killed in a car wreck? Should we not meet in the church building because it could get hit by lightning and catch on fire? Yeah. You know, we accept risks every day. Every day.
Bob made the comment at the beginning about, and we've done the same thing. we met for a long time in the parking lot. Both congregations did, and we were trying as hard as we could to stay together, to assemble, to sing to one another, to partake of the supper together, and do those things that the Lord commands the church to do. But I know we've already had that experience. We had to go back to the parking lot, but it was wonderful to be able to get back in our building or place of worship and see one another and hear one another sing well. And for me as a preacher, and sort of like you, Bob, it was nice to be able to see people.
Yeah. John, to the fellow's original comment as well, where he seemed to separate Bible study from church. It's interesting that this oft-quoted passage in Hebrews chapter 10 about coming together, it had to be preached on back then.
Yeah.
And it needs to be preached on. They had good reasons to stay away. I think maybe out of fear of persecution, who knows what. But still he said, and this is Hebrews 10 at verse 24, and let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembly of ourselves together, as is the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. You can explain that passage away, but if you just read it, it's not hard to understand.
No, it's not. You know, there's been several times through this where I've been sort of resentful of the inconvenience of some of the things we've had to do. But, you know, we haven't ever gotten to the point yet where we had to meet in the catacombs.
Yeah.
In order to meet. And those early Christians were meeting down in those graves. The smell must have been terrible in order to be together, in order to assemble.
Yeah.
And so what little inconvenience we've had is nothing yet compared to that. Go ahead, Engineer Dave. Yeah, were you going to say something, Bob? I'm sorry, I stepped on you.
I just wanted to encourage that fellow who made that comment to actually decide what he thinks about this passage in Hebrews. Because it's one that really needs, if you're going to be honest with yourself, you need to think about what this passage says. That's all.
Go ahead, Engineer Dave.
Well, you've gotten several comments on Facebook about this subject. The first comment came from Larry, who just gave me one word, which was Cornelius.
Okay.
And then
the Cornelius was a centurion, so he's responding to the earlier comments about policemen honoring their commitment to their command structure.
We have that delay on here, so the comments don't always arrive with the topics as I see them. But anyway, and then Brian commented with Ephesians 3:8 through 12, church is part of God's eternal plan.
Okay.
Keep going?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's good.
And then Larry commented again. He said 1 Timothy 4:13, Paul told Timothy to pay attention to the exhortation. Exhortation is found within the local church, and the faith, i.e. Hebrews 10:25, says not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together.
Okay, yeah, that's what Bob brought up. What is 1 Timothy 4:13? Guys, first one there, read that to me and tell me what we're thinking about. 4:13, I got it. It says, let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers in word and conversation and charity and spirit and faith and purity, till I come, give attendance to reading, to exhortation, to doctrine. And, okay.
Except that that's not saying instead of going to church.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Good point. Okay. More?
All right, and then Randy commented, and he said, there are some things that we cannot do without the local congregation, like stirring up each other in good works, partaking the Lord's Supper, etc. We cannot do that without our brethren.
Well, you know, one of the things we try to do, and I'm sure they did this something similar at Crawfordsville, is that we are encouraged, we are taught in the scriptures to sing to one another. And so we've tried to encourage the brethren, if they would, when they get to the point at which we assemble out there in the parking lot, to roll their windows down so at least the other folks can hear the encouragement of that singing. And I have heard that, and I've even tried to sing a little louder. Not that the Lord would hear me more, but I want the other folks to know that we're praising the Lord together. Go ahead.
All right, and last comment for now. This comes from Diane, and I'm sending it to the Facebook. Okay, I think it is wonderful if members can get to church, but for those whom don't drive or have access to church, I believe it is better to believe and study to understand God's wonderful words.
Well, what about that? There are folks, I suppose, who can't get to church, right, Alan?
Yeah, I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are folks that can't get to church for any number of reasons. They may have a long-term health issue that prevents them from getting out. They could have, I suppose they could live somewhere so remote that they can't get to church very easily or something. Although I would think that that might be wiser that they would start a work wherever they are and flourish where they're planted, as it were. But
They might be in jail.
Yeah, it could be in jail.
It's hard to get to church from in jail.
They could be in the military, for example. They could be in the military where there is no place close by where they can adequately worship.
Yeah.
And in that case, yes, they can study, and as this person suggests, could study and learn and be obedient to the will of God through that in that way. But in the end, I think there is a need for us to gather as a congregation.
Yep.
And each one of us needs to be there. You know, I remember hearing you comment a number of times in sermons. There is no such thing as a church member a member at large.
Yeah.
You are a member of the congregation. Even Paul, if we recall, sought to join himself to the congregation, I believe, at Antioch. And, of course, they didn't want to have anything to do with him at first because of his reputation. And it was Barnabas who brought him in, if you will. And but even Paul understood the need to be a part of that local congregation and that local work.
You know, Bob, one of the things I've noticed, and I wonder how many more of our listeners felt the same way through this pandemic, is I have been in such a habit my whole life of going to church twice on Sunday, lately, doing Prove All Things Tuesday night, and then Wednesday night going to Bible study, that I can't tell what day of the week it is.
Yeah.
I kind of wake up and say, well, what is this? Because so much of my life was involved with assembling and studying with the saints that I told the days of the week by virtue of that.
Yeah. I think I've experienced the same thing. And by the way, we ought to mention, we're not talking about people who can't come.
Amen.
We're talking about people who could come but don't or won't.
Amen. You know, of course, during this situation, we've had a lot of people at the church that were sick. Hey, we didn't want them to come. You stay home, get well. We usually refer to that as being providentially hindered. And when you're well, we are going to welcome you back with open arms, or at least with a elbow bump, the world being what it is. But it has been hard for me. I can't tell what day of the week it is.
Yeah.
Because we've just our habits been so terribly changed? Go ahead, Engineer Dave.
You had a comment from Brian, who says Jerusalem, Acts 9:26.
Yeah, he's correcting me. I had said Antioch.
Oh.
I said Antioch was the church that Paul was trying to join. I got ahead of myself. No, it wasn't Antioch. It was Jerusalem. And Brian's quite right.
Brian, we appreciate that. You need to watch Alan all the time.
Thanks for bird dogging me. I think next time we'll get you on the program.
Amen.
You might try to be patient with Alan. He's still recovering from vacation.
That's
Yeah,
right. That's right.
I'm still on vacay mode.
Oh, well. Come on, Engineer Dave. Get back in here.
He's on the phone with a potential caller.
Oh, he is? Okay.
Yes.
Well, don't let us talk to him. Don't spend all day talking. Was there anything else in this call about the police, or this question about the police? There was so much in it.
I'm not sure there's anything left to cover.
I think we dealt with all of it.
This person does point out, here are these passages in John 18 and Luke 22, both of them referring to the events of Jesus' arrest.
Yeah.
And where Peter, if you recall, cut off the ear of Malchus, the servant of the high priest, and Jesus immediately put a stop to that lawlessness.
Yeah.
And admittedly, if anyone would have been in his due right to defend himself, it would have been Jesus. But rather than do that, he knew it was the will of God of what was about to transpire, and he immediately put a stop to that violence that Peter was undertaking to get out of that situation. And so, yeah, it's a good point that way, that if one has the ability. You guys have made some good points. If one has the ability to stop that kind of violence, I think it's incumbent on, especially the police officer, to do so.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. There may be situations that come up where, if it's one officer against 2,000
100 people.
Yeah, or a host of angry, rabid animals, in effect. Yeah, maybe discretion is the better part of valor.
Alrighty.
In that time.
I don't know where Engineer Dave went. He's probably arranging a loan on the phone. We're gonna go. We're gonna go to our phone bank and pick up another question there. Let me get things turned up.
Here comes Dave.
What?
He may have something hot.
Well, no. No, there was a lady on the phone, says she listens to us all the time.
Yeah.
She said she was 83. I couldn't get her to talk to you, but she feels like we missed the point on both sides. And I think I'm sorry, she said a lot, and I'm trying to get back here.
Miss which point?
The ox in the ditch.
Okay.
I mean, when you can't get to church, you can't get to church. I think you mentioned providentially hindered, but
Sure.
So.
Sure. That point, the Lord made a point about the Pharisees, or that they would, on the Lord's Day, even if they weren't supposed to work, they would get their ox out of the ditch. And the same thing's true if I'm headed to church on the Lord's Day and some emergency comes up that I need to help and stop and help and take care of, or whatever, then I'm going to need to deal with that. That's the same sort of thing. If suddenly my meal I ate last night that has poisoned me kicks in, and I've got food poisoning, even though I've got my suit on and my fancy clothes, it's time to stop and deal with the situation as it is.
Yeah, I would also say we used to have a commenter on here. I believe she was from Montana
Okay.
or somewhere like that. She said she had to drive an hour and a half to get to church every Sunday.
I do recall that, yes.
You remember that?
I do.
And she hasn't been on for a while, but I really appreciated her comments about that. You do have some comments on Facebook if you.
Okay. I know people, there's not many faithful churches up in Michigan, and a lot of those folks drive a long way to worship and are happy to get there. Go ahead.
This is from Gloria, and she says Luke 3:14 says, "Do violence to no man." What does that mean for a law enforcement officer's duty?
Okay, this was a statement made to the soldiers who asked, "What shall we do?" And he doesn't tell them to not be soldiers. He tells them that they should avoid violence. A Roman soldier in Palestine at the time could virtually do anything
To anybody.
to anybody,
Yeah.
especially to the Jews. They were a commanding force, and oftentimes they did. One of the passages about if someone compel you to go a mile, go with him too. They could do that. They could say, "Here, you pick up my luggage and tote it for a mile," and a Jew had to do it. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. False accusation. If you get a burr under your saddle about some individual, it's real easy to make false accusations against them. And I got a suspicion that there's a lot of that going on these days. There's a lot of people who've got a chip on their shoulder and can make those false accusations so fast without properly understanding the situation, and be content with your wages. Those are obvious things. The violence would be that behavior that was outside what was legally expected of a soldier. There are certain things he does, and then there's the idea of doing violence to peaceful people. I would assume that doing violence to people who were being violent to you is not what he's talking about here. He's talking about doing violence to peaceful people. Otherwise, that violence to the lawbreaker is just enforcing the law. So, what do you got there, Engineer Dave?
I got one more comment from Rita, and she says, "It has not been the head of the police that have ordered the stand down, but the mayors of these cities that have ordered it, and they have done it for political reasons. I guess the lesson is we need to be extra careful who we vote for."
Amen.
Now that's a political statement, Rita. I don't know what was in their mind. I'm with you. I've got suspicions, but we can't say that. And if the mayor, who is the authority, tells the chief of police, "This is what you've got to do," the chief of police then passes that on to his men. So, what?
Stop looking at me.
Don't look at the camera. Okay, hello there. Bob, what about it? Like I say, your daughter is with the police. Well, does the mayor out there command the chief of police as to what to do?
Well, I'm sure he has a hand in it, to what degree or another. By the way, that passage at Luke 3:14, the New King James says, "Likewise soldiers," and he said that do not intimidate anyone, nor accuse falsely, be content with your wages.
Okay.
So all kinds of things going on, as you've mentioned.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, what do you got out there? Have we satisfied everybody?
I believe so.
Okay. I don't know. As I tried to say, I question, and I think all of us do, a lot of the thinking of a lot of leaders during this crisis, and that's probably going to be true during nearly any crisis. is we're going to spend a lot of time. I'm not in the position. I'm fairly glad I'm not in the position. The original question was, here's this guy low down on the totem pole in the police department. What does he do when he's told to stand down in a riot situation? And he's not the mayor, he's not the chief of police, he's the one who's down there on the bottom. And I would think that he doesn't, maybe he would perhaps ought to realize he doesn't know everything about every situation, and he's going to have to obey the command authority, just as a soldier on the field of battle would. Let's go over and attack them now, they're vulnerable. But the general or his commanding officer knows better about the situation, and you obey the command authority. That's what you're taught to do, and I think we understand that. So, Bob, so y'all are meeting inside the building. Are you meeting just on Sunday?
Yes, we're just meeting one time on Sunday at 10:30, where we'll have Bible class as well as the lesson and the community, all in a period of about an hour. So we're not meeting at night, nor are we meeting on Wednesday as yet. But we're enjoying being back in the building and being together, even if we're staring at each other's eyes more than anything else.
I know that feeling. It is such a frustrating feeling. And, the older I get, the more I depend on seeing people's lips move to understand what they're saying.
Yeah.
Sort of reading their lips. And, man, some of these people, it's really hard to say, what in the world are you saying? got some friends that speak with an accent, and some people I was in talking to a bank today, and I said, hey, you're going to have to talk slow for me. But it's good to be there. It's good to be there.
Good to be with you today.
What's the address of the church?
It's at 419 North Englewood Drive here on the east side of Crawfordsville.
419 Englewood Drive. All right.
Well, and also have a website at CrawfordsvilleChurchofChrist.com.
And Bob puts out a terrific bulletin. I think it's all. Don't you put your bulletin on the website?
Yep, it's on there as well. It hasn't been refreshed a whole lot lately.
Oh, yeah.
But will be. It will
okay.
be.
And I think you put some of your sermons on there, don't you?
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people steal them. I've seen that. I might have even stolen one or two myself.
I'm glad for you to have it.
It's a good lesson, good place. Okay. We're going to be meeting. I'm going to beat him to this because he's grumping about it. We right now are scheduled to meet one more time in our parking lot at 10:30 this coming Sunday, and we're hoping that's the last time. That on the 19th we'll be back in the building. I did speak to Andres Pong, and he says he would like, I might as well talk to you about this since you're one of the elders of the church.
Very well.
He says he would like to speak in Spanish on this coming Lord's Day, 9:30. We have done that before.
Okay.
He's been sick, but he says he's well.
Okay.
Is that all right?
If he's well, yes, I think so.
All righty. So he would be speaking in Spanish to some of our Spanish members at 9:30 on this coming Lord's Day, and then 10:30 we'll have our worship service. This is at 3103 North High School Road, 3103 North High School Road here in Indianapolis. We'd love to have you come join with us. It's good to be back with you too. And if the Lord wills, we can enjoy more of these opportunities. Good evening to you.